What's up, everyone? I'm back here with one of my larger Japanese black pines and I'm going to be doing some fall work to it. Let me go ahead and give this a spin just so that you can take a look. Now, if you haven't seen the video that I did on this same tree in June, I would recommend that you go back and watch that video to see what got us to this point. So the tree has responded really nicely to the cutback that I did, and the next step here is to come in and do some thinning on all of this foliage before the winter. I want to use the thinning process to remove excess buds and excess needles. Now, because I cut back into the second year needles in the decandling process, I'm going to have fewer needles that I actually need to pull, but I'm going to have a different growth pattern than I would have had if I had cut past the nodes. So because I'm going to be making a mess, I'm going to start here on the upper part of the tree first. And so as I drop things, I will basically be able to clean them up as I go. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just put a couple of towels over the soil surface so I don't have to come back and pick off needles and excess buds from within the soil. So I'm starting by just pulling off some of these needles that are on the lower section of growth, or I should say on the undersides of the new shoots. So this is all of this summer's growth that happened after decandling. So there's going to be a mixture of buds in here, some of which are going to be a lot weaker than others. So what I'm going to do is pull off all of the little teeny ones like this, unless I don't have anything else in that location. So if I have a couple of stronger buds, I'll go ahead and leave those while taking off things like this. So the main tools that you're going to need are just a nice stiff pair of tweezers to pull off needles and buds that are not super woody, and then a pair of trimming scissors. And then maybe towards the end of this process, we might do a little bit of pruning, but depends on the state of the tree. So a good pair of tweezers like this and just your regular bonsai trimming scissors is pretty much all you need. Now you can see that I alternate between using my fingers and using the tweezers. I actually prefer to use my fingers, but sometimes I can't get into the tight spaces, and so that's when I use the tweezer instead. So there's sort of an interesting thing that's going on here on some of these branches, and this one's a good example. I cut it into the needles, and so these two guys are obviously needle buds, but then behind it here is a adventitious bud that came out of the node that was behind that section. So the node at the base of that 2-year-old branch has put out 2 stronger shoots than the needle buds. So in some cases, I'm actually just going to cut all of these guys off because I have buds back further. But in other cases, I'm going to cut some of these off, but I'm going to wait to make all of those decisions until I've finished thinning enough to be able to see the relative structure. So I want to leave these needles that are right here down near the base of these strong shoots, because if I'm going to cut this back again next summer, then I need to have those needles in place in order to compact this. I don't want all of that growth way up in here. I want it branching and splitting down in here to keep the silhouette more compact. As a result of the way that I cut this back in the summer behind the nodes, there's a couple of different things that are going on that are maybe different than normal. So let's take a look here. First, I've got a bunch of buds here, more than I need coming out of one place. So I'm going to cut one of them off to use as an example. All right, just imagining that this is still attached to the tree. The result of doing decandling, or wanting to do decandling behind the node. So next year we would normally decandle here after the bud that's right here extends in the spring around decandling time in the summer. But because I want to decandle behind the node, I want to use needle buds, and that means that rather than pulling these needles that are down near the base, I need to leave those needles so that those buds are intact. So instead of pulling the needles that are at the base, I'm going to leave 3, 4, 5 pairs that are at the base and instead pull the ones that are kind of midway up between those and the ones that sort of form the rosette at the top. Let me just do this as an example. And for clarity's sake, I'm pulling off the bracts, but it's actually not typically necessary. Okay, so I've left a pair of needles down here on this side, a pair of needles here. I actually would have left a couple more. There's one right there. And then I've pulled all the needles here from the middle of the shoot, kind of where my tweezer tips are there. And that's made essentially more space. So I've left enough needles at the tip to keep the branch strong, and I've left the needles here down lower, which when I come back next summer, I would probably decandle back into those needles either here or here. All right, and the other thing I want to point out is this right here. So this is a strong branch, even though it's on the base, and I've got a lot of strong buds here coming out of side branches. But when I decandled this part at the end here, it didn't bud out very strong from that last section. So rather than keeping that with all of these weak buds that are on here, I'm actually just going to cut back to the next strong bud, which is this one coming out of the side of it, which means that I have to take off some of that wire as well. And now I have this bud that I can use as the main leader rather than trying to nurse back that center section back to health when it's already demonstrated some weakness. I'm going to go ahead and continue that same needle pulling pattern that I just mentioned here throughout the crown. And I just want to give some credit to both Jonas and Adam Toth, who are the first people who I ever saw using it. I don't know whether it was a technique that is used commonly in Japan or not, but it makes perfect sense because if you're going to cut back into needles, you have to have the needles there that you want to cut back to. So leaving just a few down here at the base, as well as a bunch up at the tip, is kind of the ideal way to thin down the needles so that there's more light and air penetrating to the center of the composition without eliminating the budding sites that you want. Now, of course, right here, there's actually too many buds. So that part that I was just thinning, I just cut off. I think I'm finished with bud thinning and needle pulling for now. And the next step would be to go through here and really check out whether or not any of the wire that I've left on from last fall is beginning to cut in. Now, when you decandle trees, they make a lot less wood, and that means that it's less likely that your wire is going to start to bite in. But some of the growth on here has been super vigorous, so I'm going to go through and just kind of take a look and see if there's anything that's biting in. On the lower branches, I've already looked. The place where wire tends to bite in the most is on the underside of shoots that are, or on the underside of a shoot right near the junction with a larger branch. And part of that's probably because you use that as a fulcrum when you're bending down branches. All right, not too much wire biting in. Now I can use the remaining wire to just sort of spread things out, because at this point I'm not really trying to make the tree look super pretty. I'm still working on the branch structure and density to the point where it'll probably be another 2 to 3 years before I would consider the crown and branching to be even close to maturity. Now, the thinning process has set me back pretty well, but I do think that the technique that I used in June has really kept the tree compact, as well as created a much more distributed growth pattern than what it was giving me last year and in this spring. So I'm really happy with the result. There are still a couple of issues with this tree that I need to address, one of which is that there are some large wounds left, one of which is right here, just below the crown. It's not a bad place to have a wound because pines are evergreen, and so this is going to get buried in the crown. But I have been contemplating starting another sacrifice branch. The problem with starting a sacrifice branch is exactly where to start it. And because I'm trying to create distributed growth up here, if I say use this as the sacrifice branch, it's going to create a really big branch on the backside here, bigger than what I actually want for the crown. So in order for the sacrifice branch to actually do me any good, I kind of need to have it be one of these buds that's right here in the middle of the crown and have that just sort of spike out for a while in order to lay down enough wood to heal that wound. I'm going to leave this for now because I'm not done contemplating whether or not I can figure out a way to make it work. But ultimately, it's probably, as far as I can evaluate right now, not going to be ideal for a sacrifice branch. Now, just in case you were wondering about my little trick here with the towels and saving myself some cleanup work, I'm going to take my tools off here and then peel back the towels. It's never perfect, but it's definitely going to save me a bunch of time picking the needles out from in between the soil. So instead of having to blow off or pick out all those needles, I just have a few needles and a few weeds that I need to take care of. That wraps up this thinning session on my extra large Japanese black pine. I'm not sure whether I can call it Gojira, but I will contemplate that. I like it as a potential name. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.